Hey everybody, I'm Christopher Green. You're tuning in to AMTV Alternative Media Television. It's Thursday, May 28th, 2015. Where is Russia? Where in the world is Russian San Diego? Where in the world is Vladimir Putin San Diego? Isn't it interesting? There actually was a disappearing act by Vladimir Putin not too long ago that was debated by the mainstream media, the underground, the undercurrent that makes up the alternative media. It's something I discussed. All this tension revolving around Ukraine, this manufactured tension by the United States of America, which of course has a very, very keen interest in this part of the world, as does Europe. Russia basically controlling a monopoly of natural gas and petroleum related trade to the European Union. Revolution and re-revolution, whether or not this is Ukraine, or we see this in the Middle East, or we see this in the countless countries that the United States topples through our intelligence agencies. Illegally, by the way. In fact, former Deputy Director of the CIA, Michael Morrell, was getting beaten up by Mr. Hardball Chris Matthews. I was watching a video sent by one of our subscribers, basically talking about how the United States people were lied to by the president at the time, George W. Bush, Donald Rumsfeld, and sold a total piece of bullshit, which ended in our illegal invasion of countries like Iraq. Where is Russia? And why is there an increase in this rhetoric, in this media, in regards to China? The drumbeat of war. War! Why? Why is this psychologically being put in our mind? I'm reading an article here from news.com.au. I'll put up on the screen. The war word is being increasingly heard as Europe, Russia, China, and the United States adopt provocative postures. We've talked about this, how China is building in the South China Sea, these islands, which they're currently dredging, that they're using for military purposes, building a landing strip where bombers can take off, where they could potentially house their navy, laying claim to the Spratly Islands, which multiple countries have claim to. I read a tweet yesterday, and this is coming from this article. This is from John Schindler, who said, a senior NATO, non-US GOFO told me today we'll probably be at war this summer. If we're lucky, it won't be nuclear. Let that sink in for a moment. That's his tweet. We'll be lucky if it's not nuclear this summer. War. Russia. China. The drumbeat to war. Why? Why the increased intensity of this rhetoric right now? Half a world away, the W word was mentioned again yesterday, this time in an editorial by a Chinese state-controlled paper, said the Global Times. If the United States' bottom line is that China has to halt its activities in the South China Sea, then a U.S.-China war is inevitable. Wow. That sounds pretty serious. You can see a map here of the China's island building projects. Of course, all this ties into the new reserve currency that we've talked about extensively. I've done several videos on the yuan. The urging of people like George Soros to add the yuan to the SDR basket that makes up this diversified basket of currency thanks to the IMF and the International Monetary Fund. Until recently had been ignoring military overflights of these islands by the U.S. and other regional nations. China is maintaining its stance that its aggressive construction work on disputed islands in Southeast Asia is no different to building highways or public facilities anywhere else on the mainland. such as its determination that these disputed territories are its own. Combined, the increasingly threatening talk is causing many to take notice. High-profile U.S. billionaire investor George Soros told the World Bank last week, if there is conflict between China and a military ally of the United States like Japan, then it is not an exaggeration to say that we are on the threshold of a third world war. More war rhetoric coming from George Soros. Military exercises taking place at the border of Ukraine. Where's Putin? How is it that there's been this disappearing act in the mainstream media recently, in this new Cold War with Russia that had been kind of the talking point for months now? And now it's all about China. And the supposition that if this egregious Chinese growth were to falter, this is what people like George Soros are telling us, that the likelihood that China and Russia will form a more permanent alliance will only likely increase our chances for war. Not just a little itty-bitty war, but a world war. I thought all of this was conspiracy theory. I thought it was fear-mongering to talk about a world war. I thought it was alarmist to talk about the obvious fact that China and Russia are gearing up for a war with the United States, a war that I honestly don't think they want. It's the United States that wants the war. It's why they're building this rhetoric. They're building this campaign to prepare the American people psychologically for an impending action, for an impending confrontation. Again, China building these islands in the South China Sea. The war drums building. Meanwhile, billionaire George Soros explained his fears over the South China Sea tensions to the World Bank. If China's economy continues to falter, he said last week, there is a real danger that China will align itself with Russia politically and militarily, and then the threat of third world war becomes real. End quote. George Soros. He's also been arguing for China to be allowed to join the IMF's international currency market to allow the yuan to compete with the US dollar. Isn't it interesting that there's been this disappearing act in the mainstream media of Vladimir Putin, Russia, our supposed enemy, this new Cold War, and now all the attention is being refocused to China. We had this psychological shift from Russia now to China. Both enemies, according to the mainstream corporate-owned media here in the United States, enemies of the U.S. The rising East, the red giant that makes up China. Keep your eye on the ball, folks. This is all happening. This is all very real. Take George Soros's word for it. Take the IMF's word for it. Take the mainstream media's word for it. They're building the narrative for war. I'm Christopher Green. Get this video out everywhere. Make it viral, hard-hitting it in your face, and click the link below to support our sponsor.